Yes, all right. Yo, 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 we are back in Blender, back on the ground. Congratulations if you survived the previous video. It was a break. I know it was super dense, but hear me out. By the time I was 25, I had won a major design award. And by the time I was 27, I was doing client work for top companies and I was exhibiting digital artworks in Europe, in North America, in East Asia. And I did all of that using Blender and knowing stuff. So trust me, I'm telling you this from personal experience. All of that knowledge is guaranteed to come in useful. For some of you, it may be beyond scope, and for some others, it will be just the beginning of your journey. But trust me, it's good knowledge to have. Anyway, like promised, today we start our journey with actual 3D modeling. And I've been thinking a great deal, how am I gonna show you this? Like, what's the best way to go about it? Because here's the problem. 3D modeling is all about knowing all of these little commands and operations and actions that you can take, that you can perform. But if you don't see them in action, in context, they don't mean much. And so the problem is that if I just show you all of the techniques that exist, but they're not put into perspective, then they won't make too much sense to you. And at the same time, if I start 3D modeling and I just sort of like walk you through what I'm doing, there is also a good deal of 3D modeling that is just sort of repeating some actions, that there's an element of repetition to it. And so the key moments, the most salient actions get sort of like dispersed along the whole process of 3D modeling the object. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, I'm just gonna introduce you to all the main techniques that you should know. And so that way you just know that they exist and we're good on that side. And after that, we're gonna switch gear a little bit. We're gonna break things down into maybe smaller, maybe shorter videos. And we're gonna switch style to something that is more like a voiceover. And I'm gonna walk you through the things that I do as I 3D model. And I'm gonna walk you through my process. And then when something of relevance in terms of like 3D modeling techniques comes up, I'm just gonna highlight it, point it out, and talk about it a little bit more. Okay, cool, let's go. Right now I am in viewport rendered mode because I want to see some color. I'm gonna turn on the show overlays and kind of clean the scene by hiding everything. And now I'm gonna press Shift+S, cursor toward origin to make sure everything gets spawned at the origin of our scene. And little reminder, you always have in the bottom left corner the screencast keys. And as a matter of fact, I'm also gonna get rid for the moment of the backdrop, and then Shift+A, mesh, and we're gonna start with our default cube. To keep things tidy, I'm gonna create a new collection and I'm gonna call it 3D modeling. And then I'm gonna drag the cube inside of it. And now everything we do will be happening inside this collection. All right, so the first concept that I want to pass you is that when we create a primitive mesh, like a cube, we get this object with a default name cube created, right? But the object per se is like just a container of information about vertices, edges, and faces. In fact, although it might seem crazy at first, you could select the cube, go into edit mode, everything will be selected, just press X, faces, and now you have deleted everything in terms of like geometry information inside the container, but the container is still there and it's still named cube. It's not gonna rename itself, but technically now it's just an empty object. It's there, but there's nothing in it. This is important to understand because actually inside a container you can have any number of objects. In fact, I could even now go ahead, press Shift+A and create a cylinder. And now this cylinder is existing as part of this 3D model of this object. They are one big object. They are not separated. This is not the same thing as if I were in object mode and created a separate cylinder. As you can see, if I create the object outside in the object mode, it gets created as its own entity. Whereas if you enter edit mode into a container and then create stuff within it, it's gonna get created as part of that specific object. Now I'm going back to the first mesh that we created. I'm gonna bring back that cylinder to its origin. I'm gonna get rid of the cube. And at this point, I'm gonna just rename them A and B. And the next thing I want you to know is the following. From the object mode, you can right click on an object and then you have two interesting options, shade smooth and shade flat. Now, if you shade smooth, nothing has fundamentally changed in terms of geometry, in terms of what information the mesh has, but what we're changing is how we are rendering it and previewing it. And this has something to do with the normals, but without getting into the technical details. As the name suggests, when you shade something smooth, it kind of gets curvy, it gets smooth. Whereas when it's flat, you will be able to see all the single edges and faces. And so in 90% of the cases, you will be using smooth because it is also likely that in 90% of the cases, you will be modeling surfaces that are more organic or that need to appear as a very smooth surface. But if you were to be doing some hard surface modeling, meaning stuff that it's very edgy, that has a lot of flat planes and surfaces, then you want to stay into shade flat mode. Now, if you're in edit mode and you press 3 to stay into the face selection mode, you will notice by selecting some faces that you can actually do the same at the individual face level, and you have some options here. So I could shade flat those specific 3 faces, and now those would be shaded flat and the rest of the mesh would be shaded smooth. Although this is rarely done because, as you can see, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you have a very specific case that requires it. Now, moving on, the number one command you need to know is Ctrl+R. Ctrl+R starts the edge loop operation that allows you to introduce new edge loops into a 3D model. An edge loop is what you're seeing on screen right now, this highlighted yellow section, and basically that's it. It's adding more geometry to it. It's kind of like a localized subdivision where you are able to control where you are adding extra information that then you can manipulate. Now, what you need to understand about most operations that you're going to perform when 3D modeling is that once you select the command, Ctrl+R or whatever the case may be, the operation has started, but usually there are some steps to it. It's not done yet. So right now we are visualizing on what plane or face we need to introduce the new edge loop. And I'm just previewing things. And if I move over here, I can see that I could also introduce edge loops vertically to these faces or maybe make a cross section. Now, if I were to click with a right click, I would sort of cancel the operation at this stage. Whereas if I click with the left, I am moving on to the next stage. The next stage of the Ctrl+R operation is that it lets you decide where you want to exactly place the edge loop. Now at this stage, if you right click away, it's gonna snap it in the middle of the section. Whereas if you go up to a certain point and then left click, it's gonna place it there. At this point, the operation per se is completed, but before you click away, you can still input information manually, as it is often the case with most commands. And so, for example, here we have the factor. So if I wanted to place this near the very edge, I could ask for the value to be minus 0.9, and this would go very close to the edge. And this ranges from -1 to +1. So if I were to do just 0.9, it would be on the opposite side, but just as far. And if I wanted it to be just in the middle, it would be 0, and then it snaps in the middle. Okay, so now we have created sort of like a middle section. And so this and this are now two sections of their own. And if I were to press Ctrl+R again, then I get to preview where I want to place my next edge loop. And so I could place it in the top. And now the 0 corresponds to the middle of this section, which is right here. Now, another option that you have that is useful is the number of cuts that you want to introduce. You're not limited to introducing one at a time. You could introduce 5, for example. At the same time, when you press Ctrl+R, right at this moment, you could type 5, and you will be previewing the same thing. Now you can bring in 5 edge loops at the time. And if you change your mind, backspace to cancel, and all of these numbers are showing up here in the top left corner where you have the manual input information. So now I'm gonna type 8, and now I will be placing 8 edge loops. Or I can go here and I'll see that I would be placing 8 cuts vertically. Okay, so now I have undone all of that. I think that now you get the gist of both the insert edge loop operation and also the gist of how most operations will work. And now we will pick up the pace a little bit. Press 2 and you will be in edge selection mode. Alt and double click on an edge, and this will select everything in the loop. In this specific case, you could have also just selected the face if you were in face mode. And the next command that we will be reviewing is Ctrl+B, as in bevel. Now, bevel is always kind of touchy. So what I do in the next step of the operation is I just let it go and then manually input the exact value that I want from this property right here. And this value often depends on the size of your object. So in most cases, you will have to sort of play with it and kind of see what value is in the right range. Now the bevel command introduces a bevel, obviously, but you can think of it a little bit as the edge loop, with the distinction that instead of inserting an edge, you are inserting a whole set of faces. And so now that I have this extra loop over here, I would like to reiterate that if you press down Alt and you double click on the edge, it's gonna select the whole loop for you, as opposed to simply clicking on an edge and that will select the single edge. Now, if I wanted to select the whole set of faces, I would make sure I am in number 3, face selection mode, and then I would press down Alt. And if I wanted the vertical section, I would double tap here. Whereas if I wanted the horizontal section, I would tap on this side. It doesn't have to be this specific edge or this one. Any will work. It's just that this side will trigger the horizontal selection and this the vertical, and you will get a sense for it immediately as soon as you start playing with it. Moving next, we are going to press E, and we are now starting the extrusion command. Extrusion lets you create extra mesh, extra geometry, but it extrudes it. So extrusion means something kind of coming out, but also could be negative. So it's kind of like going in. And once again, this is sort of like a live preview that you have. And when you left click, you confirm it. And then you have your usual menu where you can sort of input manually the values. So I'm gonna make this a clean -20, for example. Now, just like you can concatenate command when you're moving stuff around, you can sort of do the same with 3D modeling commands. So now I'm gonna press E, which is gonna extrude, but right away before I move the mouse or type anything else, I'm gonna press S as in scale. And so right now I am extruding, but I'm kind of creating a section with the geometry in place. And now I have stayed on the same plane, but I have kind of created this concentric section to it. And if now I press E again, I have created this sort of like extra loop shape. So this is another way to use the extrusion command, which is kind of the same of the next operation, which is I, as in insert. So I lets you insert a face, and you can also do this on non-continuously selected faces. So I'm gonna select a few faces over here, press I, and then you'll see that I'm sort of creating this extra geometry in it. Okay, moving forward with a face selected, we have the usual Shift+D duplication command, which will make a copy of that face, edge, or vertices that you have selected, and then you will be able to sort of like place it around. And now if you right click, beware that that face still exists. You just have let it snap in place. So right now if I press G and Z, then you will see it's still there, it's still existing, and you might want to make sure that it doesn't stay as a double unless it is intended to for some reason. Or another thing that you can do is press A to select everything and then press M to bring up this merge menu. Now the merge menu, we will cover it in more detail later on, although there's not too much to cover about it. But if you select by distance, basically it's gonna get rid of the doubles. Anything that perfectly overlaps within this tolerance is gonna get rid of it. So right now we have removed 32 vertices, which were the 32 vertices that defined that duplicated circle we had just created. Now, similarly, with a face selected, you could press P, and that will bring up the separation menu. And if you separate the selection, what has happened is that now you have separated that face from this object. And so if you notice, we now have a new object in our outliner that is A.001, and that is the face we just separated. Now that we have two meshes, if we wanted to make everything into a single object again, we could do so with the join command. And so right now I'm gonna select this cylinder, this part, and also this part that we just created. And then you can join everything with the Ctrl+J or by right-clicking and explicitly selecting join. Now beware that now this part has been brought back into the same mesh, but it sort of still exists as its separate mesh. And so in some cases, you might want to go through the process we just viewed of pressing A, M, and by distance. And now this face is once again part of this geometry. They are together and they act as one. Now starting to play a little bit with vertices, I pressed 1 to get into vertices mode, and I could select 2 vertices and press J, not Ctrl+J, just J to join them. And it's gonna link basically the vertices. I can also select multiples, and then it's gonna look at the order in which I selected them, and then it's gonna create for me that connection. A similar command is K for knife, which is gonna bring on this menu. And this is more of an advanced feature that allows you to do a similar operation, but it is sort of freehand. So you see I am highlighting edges, and on that edge I can place a vertices. So if I am left clicking, it's gonna create a vertices over there, and then I'm gonna create it here and here and here and here. And when I'm done, I can press right click and then I'm done. And then I'm gonna press enter to confirm. And this is gonna create some freehand geometry. And now you might ask, well, how am I gonna use this? And the answer is that at some point you might need two topology flows to reconcile, and this is gonna help you cut through the mesh in a way that feels very much organic, as if you were cutting through paper, and it will allow you to sort of prepare the two geometries to talk to each other. Up next is the double tap of G. So if you double tap G, you are entering a slide mode. So now you're sliding whatever you have selected across its neighbor connections. And you can do that with faces, edges, or vertices. So right now I have these 3 edges selected, double tap G, and now I am sliding them. And I can do so across their neighbor connections. And then I'm gonna right click to get out of it. And the next thing I'm gonna show you is the rip command, which is V. Now V will sort of detach the edge that you have selected, and it's really cutting through it, basically making an opening for you to make some intervention. And all of these commands that I'm showing you, once you are in this preview mode, just like the move commands, you could press X, and now you have control on which axis you are moving. Coming up, if you have 2 edges selected or more, you could press F to create a face, and that is gonna insert a face and connect, filling the gap. Something else that you could do that is very similar is if you have 2 edges selected, you can open up the right menu and then select Bridge Edge Loops, and that is gonna do something similar, and that is gonna come very, very handy when you have to merge, for example, 2 detached concentrical rings, which can get tedious if you have to do it by hand. Okay, and lastly, if you press Ctrl+E as in edges, you will bring up the edge menu, and the same goes for Ctrl+F for faces and Ctrl+V for vertices. So as you can see, there's really a whole lot of small techniques, small commands that you can perform to manipulate the geometry. And right now, once again, we just reviewed most of them to just get you introduced to them. And we're gonna wrap this video up and then move into some actual 3D modeling with an actual goal, and I will switch to a sort of a voiceover style and just walk you through what I am doing as a 3D model and try to explain you my process of why I'm using a certain command at a certain point and explain why that situation might require that approach. Cool. We have officially started 3D modeling. I'm excited. I'll see you in the next video.